Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun had only just begun to rise above the flat line of the eastern horizon when Delaney Everett stepped out of the burned husk of the trading post. Her baby swaddled in her arms and a revolver tucked in the folds of her skirt. The air was dry and still, heavy with the scent of ash and scorched wood. What was left of the building behind her still smoldered. Beams collapsed inward, blackened by the fire that had taken everything but her life and the child in her arms. She did not look back. The boy stirred, his tiny fist brushing against her collarbone. His name was Weston, just over 3 months old, with his father's eyes and none of his father's cruelty. The only good thing Delaney had taken from Victor's ranch was this baby and her freedom. She adjusted her grip on her son and started walking, boots crunching over rock and grit. There were no roads where she was going, only long stretches of desert between here and the borderlands near the Gila River. She had a map folded in her satchel and a memory of an abandoned cabin her late uncle once showed her on the edge of the mountains. That was all she had. What she did not know, what she could not feel through the haze of exhaustion and grief, was that someone followed her. Isaiah Sutton watched her from 30 yards back, hidden behind a ridge of sun-bleached stone. The dark brim of his hat shadowed his face, sweat tracing down his jaw. He had seen the fire from a distance the night before and rode in fast, too late to stop it, just in time to see her disappear into the night with the infant. He knew who she was. Everybody in Pinal County knew about Victor Eves and the woman he kept locked away behind walls and wire. But nobody had done a damn thing about it. Not until the fire. Isaiah had not spoken to her since they were teenagers. She had been soft-spoken and kind, always helping her uncle at the general store. He remembered the way she used to braid her hair over one shoulder and how she'd once handed him a candy stick with a smile and no charge, just because he looked like he needed it. Now she was a woman with a baby and a look in her eyes he had not seen before, something raw and quiet and full of steel. He stayed far enough back to not be seen, but close enough to keep her in sight. He had his reasons for not riding up just yet. She had been trapped too long. She needed space to breathe, to fight for herself, to believe she could survive without another man deciding her path. But if she stumbled, if the desert tried to take her, he would be there. Delaney stopped walking near midday. The sun pressed down hard and cruel, and her boots were already soaked with sweat. She found a narrow overhang of rock and ducked beneath it, settling against the stone with Weston cradled against her chest. Her water skin was low. She drank a little, gave the baby a few drops on a cloth, and closed her eyes. Isaiah watched from the ridge above. He saw how her hands trembled, saw her shoulders sag with the weight of everything she was carrying. He took a slow breath and pulled his horse back, giving her distance again. By nightfall, she was walking slower. Weston cried once, his voice hoarse and weak, and she hushed him with a song so soft it barely reached her own ears. She had not sung that lullaby since her mother died. It broke something in her chest, but she kept walking. On the second day, the wind kicked up. Sand blew sharp into her skin, and the sky turned white with heat. Delaney pushed forward, boots dragging, lips cracked and bleeding. Her vision blurred. She thought she saw a rider in the distance once, but the heat twisted everything, and she blinked it away. Isaiah knew she was close to breaking. He had found a narrow arroyo with a stream running shallow through it. He doubled back, left a canteen and a pouch of dried meat and berries under a juniper tree near her path, then rode off before she arrived. She found it an hour later. Her fingers shook as she opened the pouch, disbelief flickering across her face. She looked around, searching the horizon, but there was nothing. No tracks, no sign of a rider. Her throat worked with silent thanks. She fed Weston first, then herself. 3 more days passed like that. Delaney crossed the desert with the baby in her arms, not knowing a cowboy followed to protect her. He left her water when she needed it most. Drove off a coyote one night when she was too deep in sleep to hear it. He stayed hidden, always at the edge, never letting her see him. But he was there. On the 6th day, her legs gave out. She fell just past a dry wash, Weston strapped tight to her chest. She curled around him, her breath thin and ragged. Her lips moved, whispering something only the baby could hear. Then she went still. Isaiah was off his horse before its hooves stopped. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking her pulse with gentle fingers. She was alive. Barely. The baby let out a soft cry, and Isaiah pressed his hand to the boy's back. "All right, little one," he said, voice low and steady. "I got you." He unstrapped Weston and tucked him carefully in his saddlebag, wrapped in a blanket. Then he lifted Delaney into his arms, her body limp against his chest. She came to hours later, her head against someone's chest, the sound of hoofbeats beneath her. She tried to sit up in a panic, but a strong arm held her steady. "You are safe," said a voice she had not heard in years. "It is all right, Delaney. I got you." She blinked hard, her mind slow. "Isaiah." He nodded. "Yeah, it's me." Tears welled in her eyes. "Weston, he is fine. Sleeping." She let her head drop against him again. "Why? Why are you here?" Isaiah looked down at her, his jaw tight. "Because someone damn well should have been a long time ago." They rode in silence for a while after that. The sun dipped low behind the mountains and the sky turned soft with color. Isaiah found a grove and made camp, laying her gently on a blanket near the fire. He gave her water, helped her eat, held Weston while she rested. That night, she looked across the fire at him while Weston slept between them. "You followed me," she said quietly. "I did." "For how long?" "Since the fire." Delaney watched the flames flicker, shadows dancing on her face. "Why?" Isaiah met her eyes. "Because I could not sleep knowing you were out there alone. And because I could not stand the thought of losing you again." She swallowed hard. "You never had me." His voice was low. "I wanted to." She did not say anything to that. But she did not look away either. The fire had burned down low, casting only a soft orange hue over the bedrolls and the pressed curve of Delaney's cheek. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, her skin no longer fever-warm. Weston stirred once in his sleep, a faint sound escaping him, but Isaiah's hand already hovered near the boy, palm gently resting on his back until he calmed. Delaney's eyes fluttered open just before dawn. She didn't speak right away. Her gaze drifted from the branches overhead to the shape of Isaiah's back, where he sat just beyond the fire's edge, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. She watched the way his shoulders moved under the worn canvas of his coat, the flicker of steel in his hands catching the faintest light. "You always carry that one?" she asked, her voice still rasped from dust. He didn't turn. "Since before I left Kansas. My father gave it to me when I turned 17. Not much else of his worth keeping." She shifted onto her elbow, careful not to wake the baby. "I remember your father. He used to stand on the church steps every Sunday, even when the doors were locked." Isaiah stopped sharpening, but his face didn't change. He believed the Lord might hear him better from high ground. Delaney let out a breath that almost passed for a laugh. He ever get an answer? Not one he liked. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just wide enough to hold the space between what had been and what was now. A songbird started up somewhere in the mesquite, tentative at first, then bolder. Isaiah stood and poured water into a tin cup, then crossed to her. She accepted it with both hands, the metal cool against her palms. He sat across from her, one knee drawn up, his hat set aside. "You weren't supposed to follow me," she said, not accusing, just stating. "I know." "Then why did you?" He studied the flames for a long moment. "There's a kind of quiet a man can live with, and then there's the kind that eats at you come nightfall, watching you leave. That second kind." She drank, slow and measured. "You knew what Victor was like. I heard stories, couldn't prove a thing. And I was already running from my own trouble when you married him." She looked up at that. "What kind of trouble?" Isaiah's jaw flexed, like the words didn't want to come easy. "I shot a man in Silver City." He came at my brother with a broken bottle. I put one round through his chest. Law said it was clean, but his kin didn't see it that way. I rode out one night and didn't stop till I hit the San Pedro. Delaney folded her hands around the cup. You were never meant to stay still. Maybe not, but I keep finding reasons to stop. Her eyes didn't leave his. Am I one of those reasons? He didn't answer right away. The baby stirred again, a soft hiccup of sound that pulled her attention. She lifted Weston into her arms, adjusted the wrap, and rocked him gently. Isaiah watched her hands steady, instinctive. You're good with him, he said. She brushed a thumb under Weston's chin. He's the only thing that kept me moving. He nodded once, quiet. After she settled Weston back down, she stood and stretched, her limbs slow and stiff. Isaiah rose too. There's a cabin about 2 days from here, she said. My uncle used it for trapping back when he still had the strength. Should be standing if the weather hasn't taken it. Roof. Last I saw, it held through a monsoon. He packed up in silence while she wrapped Weston tightly. When the baby was secure, she reached for her satchel, checking the contents, what little remained of the food, the map with its creases worn thin. Isaiah watched her movements, then spoke low. You can ride with me. Save your strength. She hesitated. I've walked this far. And it near killed you. Delaney's eyes narrowed, not with anger but something else, pride, maybe, or something more brittle. She looked toward the ridge, then back at him. Just till the cabin, she said. He nodded. Till the cabin. He adjusted his saddle blanket, then helped her up behind him, careful with the way she held Weston. She rested one hand against his back, the other protecting the baby between them. They rode out as the sun crested over the distant buttes. The sand cooled beneath the hooves and the wind carried the scent of creosote and sage. Isaiah kept the pace steady, not too fast, not so slow the tension could settle in their muscles. Around midday, they passed an arroyo thick with cottonwoods. Isaiah pointed out a narrow trail leading east. That way leads toward Fort Thomas. You thinking of heading back into town after the cabin? Delaney shook her head. Too many eyes there. Victor had men in every saloon. He didn't press her. Instead, he shifted his weight and adjusted the reins. There's a widow north of the Gila. Cherokee woman named Mavis. She keeps to herself but sells dried goods out of her barn. If we need supplies, she won't ask questions. Delaney's fingers tightened slightly on his coat. You trust her. She once hid 3 runaways under her floorboards for a week. I trust her. They rode until the heat pressed down again, then made camp in a narrow ravine. Isaiah set a pot to boil while Delaney fed Weston from her stores. Neither spoke much as the sun dipped low again, painting the cliffs in rust and amber. As night fell, Isaiah watched her from across the fire. Her hair had come loose, strands curling against her cheek. She didn't brush them away. I used to think I'd never get out, she said, voice quiet. You did. She looked up, eyes catching the light. Only because I burned it down. Isaiah didn't flinch. You did what you had to. Delaney's gaze lingered on him. You think that makes me dangerous? He met her eyes without hesitation. I think it makes you free. She held his stare for a moment longer, then looked away, her mouth softening at the corners. That night, she slept closer to the fire. Not beside him, but within reach. Weston between them, the desert curled around their little camp like a held breath. Isaiah didn't sleep much. He didn't need to. He kept his hand near his rifle, eyes on the stars, and listened to the soft cadence of her breath. By the time they reached the cabin, the afternoon light had shifted to that pale, slanting gold that meant evening wasn't far. The structure stood tucked against a rise in the earth, its roof pitched low and weathered, the boards silvered from sun and years. One shutter hung loose and a split ran down the front step, but the frame held. It had survived neglect and windstorms and time. Delaney slid down from the horse with Weston pressed to her chest and stared at the place. Her eyes traced the sag of the porch rail, the rusted hinge on the door, the ash-gray pile of kindling stacked against the side. Nobody's been here in years. Isaiah stepped beside her. Roof still on. That's more than most. She took the key from her satchel, a square of iron her uncle had once worn on a string around his neck. It turned with effort. The door gave a long groan when it opened. Inside, it smelled of dry pine and mouse droppings. Dust lay thick over the table and shelves, but the hearthstones were intact and the chimney drew when Isaiah lit a twist of grass and held it to the flue. Delaney set Weston down in the cradle of her bedroll near the hearth and opened the shutters one at a time, letting light spill in. The air warmed slowly as Isaiah worked the fire. She found a broom in the corner, bristles brittle but usable, and began sweeping out the dirt and cobwebs without a word. Isaiah watched her move through the space like she belonged to it before he stepped outside to check the lean-to. When he returned, she was wiping down the table with a damp rag, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair tied back in a knot. "There's a rain barrel still half full," he said. "Roof kept it clean." She nodded once. "That'll hold us a while." They worked until the sun dipped below the ridge. Isaiah brought in firewood, tested the hinges on the back window, and patched a loose board near the stove. Delaney boiled water for washing and laid Weston in the cradle her uncle had carved, lining it with her shawl. Later, when the baby slept and the wind rose outside, she sat on the floor with her back to the wall, knees drawn up, arms around them. Isaiah sat across from her, his rifle propped nearby. "You planning to stay?" he asked, voice low. Delaney looked toward the cradle, then back at him. "I can't keep running. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, Victor, in the doorway. I don't want to carry that anymore." "You won't have to." She studied his face. "You say that like it's simple. It's not. But it's true." She rested her chin on her knee. "I keep waiting for the guilt to come. For burning it all. But it doesn't." Isaiah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe that's because you don't owe the past anything." Delaney didn't answer. The fire cracked. Weston made a small sound in his sleep and stilled again. She looked back at Isaiah. "You ever think about settling? I mean really settling. No trail, no cards, no debt to outrun." He drew in a breath through his nose. "I did once, but I didn't have reason to make it last. Do you now?" He didn't look away. "I might." She stood and crossed to the fire, crouching to check the baby. When she turned back, her expression had changed, softer but steadier. "I don't know what comes next," she said, "but I don't want to face it alone." Isaiah rose slowly. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You won't," he said. Outside, the wind had quieted. The moon lifted over the ridge, pale and full. Inside the cabin, the fire threw long shadows across the walls, and for the first time in weeks, Delaney let herself feel safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't the only one holding the weight anymore. Isaiah unrolled his bedroll near the hearth, close enough to guard the door. Delaney lay beside Weston with one hand resting lightly on the child's blanket. Before the last of the fire died, she whispered, "Thank you." Isaiah's voice came back in the dark, quiet and sure. "You don't have to thank me. Just stay." The first week passed with the rhythm of survival. Delaney patched the window with cloth and wax, swept out the loft, and cleared the ash from the stove's flue. Isaiah took to the land, hunting rabbit and tracking prints near the dry arroyo to make sure no one else had been through. They didn't speak much during the work-heavy hours, but at night, when Weston lay bundled and quiet, the silence between them softened. One evening, as dusk settled blue around the cabin, Isaiah pulled a sack from his saddlebag and set it on the table. "Found this near the riverbed," he said. Delaney unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside were 2 books, the covers water-stained but intact. She looked at him with something close to surprise. "You always carry books out on the trail?" He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "I used to read when I couldn't sleep. Those were left behind in a miner's camp. Figured you might want them." She ran her fingers along the spine of one Jane Eyre, the lettering faded but legible. "I read this when I was 16. Thought it was the only story that made sense of a woman's longing." Isaiah's expression shifted, the corners of his eyes creasing a little. "You ever think about writing one yourself?" Delaney laughed once, soft and low. "I barely have time to eat some days. But I used to make up stories before, in my head, when I couldn't speak them aloud." He nodded, his tone unhurried. You do things different when you've been silenced too long. She met his gaze. You know that firsthand? I do. The wind scraped along the wall, dry and light. Delaney closed the book and looked toward the cradle. He's been sleeping more, she said. Longer stretches. Isaiah tilted his head. He knows he's safe. Delaney hesitated, then spoke quieter. I didn't think I'd ever hear someone say that and believe it. Isaiah didn't speak right away. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I'm not just here to watch over you from a distance anymore. If you want me here, I'll stay. Her throat worked around the words before they came. I do. Outside, a light rain began to fall, rare and soft, tapping against the cabin's roof like fingertips on wood. That night, Delaney didn't lie down right away. She stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching the rain thread down from the eaves. Isaiah joined her after a while, his shoulder brushing close but not touching. You ever been to Flagstaff? She asked. He shook his head. Passed near it once. Pines were so tall, I felt like I'd walked into a different country. My mother was born there, she said. She used to say the trees could keep a person honest. Isaiah glanced at her. You thinking of heading that way? I don't know. Maybe one day, when Weston's old enough to see something green. He looked ahead at the darkening sky. Wherever you go, I'll ride with you. It wasn't said with urgency or need. Just truth, plain as a fence post. Delaney turned toward him then, close enough that the space between them disappeared. Her hand found his, fingers lacing without hesitation. Isaiah didn't move, just let the quiet do what it was meant to, hold them steady. They stood that way until the rain stopped. When they went back inside, she didn't speak, but she unrolled her bed beside his. Not touching. Not yet. But near enough that her breath, when it slowed, matched the rhythm of his own. Morning came with a faint mist rising from the creek bed, a softness in the air that hadn't been there before. Delaney set out to gather kindling, leaving Weston swaddled and asleep. Isaiah watched her from the porch, the rifle across his lap idle, his gaze steady. When she returned, she glanced at him and said, There's a wild plum tree at the edge of the ridge. Might be worth checking come spring. He gave a nod. We'll see it together. And though neither of them said the word, something settled between them then, solid and sure as stone. Not a promise spoken, but lived. The kind that didn't need repeating. The days settled into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like a beginning. By early March, the frost lifted from the ground and the first shoots of green pushed up along the edge of the slope behind the cabin. Delaney stood barefoot in the doorway one morning, Weston on her hip, watching a pair of quails scratch through the brush. She didn't speak until Isaiah joined her with a tin cup in hand, steam rising from it. I want to build a fence, she said. Low enough Weston can climb it when he's older. High enough to keep the mule deer from eating the garden I plan to plant. Isaiah took a sip. We'll need to haul down some pine from the ridge. That'll take a few days. I'll help you cut it. I remember how. He raised an eyebrow. You do. I helped my uncle build a coop once. I was 12. He let me use the draw knife if I promised not to lose a finger. Isaiah glanced at her hand, long fingers curled around the baby's back. Glad you kept your promise. The corners of her mouth lifted just slightly. She looked out again, toward the wash where the creek ran thin this time of year. There's something else, she said. Isaiah waited. I've been thinking of writing a letter. To who? To the county court in Florence. Laying claim to this land. My uncle never filed papers, but he lived here near 20 years. That should count for something. Isaiah nodded. You'll need someone to stand witness. I'll ride in with you. I was hoping you'd say that. They didn't speak again for a moment. Weston reached toward Isaiah with a sleepy yawn, his fingers brushing the collar of his coat. Isaiah shifted the cup to his other hand and ran a thumb gently over the baby's knuckles. Strong grip he's got, he said. He gets that from you. Isaiah looked at her then. I never had a chance to teach a boy anything. Delaney lowered her voice. Maybe now you do. They rode out 2 mornings later, leaving before sunup. Mavis, the Cherokee widow Isaiah had spoken of, arrived just after first light to stay with Weston. She greeted Delaney with a nod and the kind of quiet understanding that needed no explanation. Her hands were scarred, her hair pulled back with a strip of faded calico, and she carried a small woven basket filled with dried pears and mint leaves. You ride safe, she told Delaney. I'll keep him close. Delaney kissed Weston's cheek and pressed her forehead to his for a breath, then turned toward the horses. The ride to Florence took 2 days. They camped near a dry bluff the first night, the moon casting pale shadows on the stones. Delaney leaned back against her saddle, her eyes fixed on the stars. I used to imagine the world was flat past the desert, she said. Like it ended just beyond what I could see. Isaiah stretched out beside her. And now I think it just begins again. In Florence, the court clerk took her statement with little ceremony. Isaiah stood beside her as she signed the page, his hand resting lightly at her back. The clerk stamped the form and slid it across the desk. That land's yours now, Miss Everett. She looked down at the paper, then at Isaiah. It's Miss no longer. They returned to the cabin with the deed wrapped in oilskin. Weston sat on Mavis's lap by the hearth, chewing contentedly on a strip of cloth soaked in cooled broth. Delaney scooped him up, holding him close, the warmth of his small body grounding her after the long ride. That night, Isaiah hung his coat on the peg by the door and set his rifle in the corner. Delaney met him near the hearth, her arms folded, eyes steady. I want you to stay, she said. Not just through spring. Not just until Weston can walk. I want you here. For good. Isaiah stepped closer, his voice low. You sure you want a man who spent half his life looking over his shoulder? I want the man who rode after me when no one else did. The one who held my boy like he was his own. The one who never once asked me to be less than I am. He reached out and let his fingers find hers. Then I'll stay. And I'll build you that fence. She leaned into him, their foreheads touching, breath shared between them. They married beneath the sycamore tree that summer, with Mavis standing witness and Weston in Isaiah's arms. Delaney wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin and lavender sprigs tucked behind her ear. Isaiah carved 2 rings from a piece of juniper and slid one onto her finger with hands that had built shelters and fired rifles but had never trembled until that day. Their life grew slow and wide. Isaiah dug post holes in the mornings while Delaney tended to the rows of beans and squash. Weston toddled through the soil, his hands always full of rocks and petals. At night, they sat on the porch with their boots off, watching the sky change color behind the ridge. Isaiah taught Weston how to hold a hammer, how to listen for quail in the brush. Delaney taught him how to read, 1 letter at a time, her voice soft and sure as she traced the shapes with his small fingers. They never spoke Victor's name again. There was no need. The past had burned. What remained was built new. In the cooler months, Delaney wrote. Not just letters, but stories. Isaiah read them aloud on winter nights, his voice warming the corners of the room as Weston fell asleep curled between them. One spring, they planted plum trees. Just 3, near the fence line. Isaiah shaped stakes from pine and tied the saplings upright. Delaney knelt in the soil, her hands pressing the roots into the earth. They'll take time, he said. So did we, she replied. Years passed. The trees grew. The fence weathered. Weston's legs stretched longer, his voice deeper. But the feel of home never changed. And each morning, before the sun rose too high, Delaney stepped out onto the porch, Isaiah beside her, their hands brushing as they watched the valley wake. They had come through fire and dust and silence. And now they had everything they needed. Together. Always.